Pleasure that I welcome you here, and we're delighted that you can take the time to visit us and to spend the evening. And I thought I'd take the opportunity of having a special conversation with you where we might explore some ideas that you might not have time to touch on tonight during your lecture. One of the things that I always find a great deal of interest in is beginnings and how one gets involved with architecture. How did you become involved with architecture, Mr. Goff?
Well, not through my own intentions, but when I was about 12 years old, my father, who was a jeweler, that is, he fixed clocks and watches, came home one day and he said, put your hat and coat on, I'm taking you to town. Going to town usually was a disaster, like going to dentist or something. But I wasn't too keen about going, but I was, at that age, I was out playing in the woods with the rest of the kids and carrying on like most 12-year-olds would. I did draw ever since I could remember. Buildings or something or other, but I never had thought of it as being architecture. In fact, I'd never heard that word at that time. I never heard the word architect. And so when he told me to go downtown, I had no idea what was up. And he stopped a man on the street corner in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we lived then, and he said, "Who's the best architect in town?" Just like that. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about.
This is your father asking the question.
Yeah, perfect stranger. And my father asked him this question, and I didn't know what he meant. But the man happened to know who was the best architect in town, fortunately for me. And he knew even where they were located and told my father where to go. I still didn't know what he was up to. We went in this office building. First time I'd ever been in one. I was scared to death because it seemed like jail to me, being a nature boy up till then, playing out in the woods and on with other kids. So this going down a hall with all these doors regimented along the side, hearing all these typewriters clicking in there, it seemed like I was getting into a world I didn't want to be in, some sort. I didn't know what. I was worried. But we went into this office then, and there was an old man sitting at a big roll-top desk. He was very fierce looking. He had a mustache, sort of like Teddy Roosevelt pictures had, and big jowls, you know, and he had palsy, and his hand would shake, and the jowls would go up and down, and he turned around and says, "What do you want?" You know, and barked it out, and I was ready to turn around and run right then. But my father said, "I want you to take this kid and make an architect out of him." And I still didn't know what he was talking about, and I was a little embarrassed too about it. But
How old were you at that time?
12.
12.
Well, really just a little under 12, about 11 3/4. But anyway, the old man got up then. He came over towards us. He said, "Do you want to be an architect, son?" I said, "I don't know. I don't even know what one is." He says, "Well, an architect plans beautiful buildings," which isn't always true, but I didn't know it. But it sounded all right. I liked the idea of beautiful things. I liked things that were beautiful to me then, and such as seashells and crystals and feathers and that sort of thing. And so the old man says, "That's what an architect does." And so I said, "Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought anything about it. I really don't know what to say about this. My dad reaches in his pocket and pulls out a sketch he'd saved of mine. I usually just threw them away. Showed it to the old man. He said, well, you could be one if you wanted to, but you have to want to. And I didn't know whether I wanted to even. And I said, well, I don't know. And he says, well, I'll tell you what you do. You come up after school tomorrow and I'll teach you how to read the architect's scale. And he picked up one of those and showed it to me, and I knew I didn't want to be one then, because the only thing like that I'd ever seen had been a tape measure or a yardstick, you see, or a ruler. And here was this funny-looking thing with all these tiny little marks. I thought it was like showing later, like it was like showing somebody a slipstick or, you know, a slide rule. It's sort of baffling looking to most people. Well, this baffled me in the same way. And I thought, well, I'll just play along, but I'm not going to come back tomorrow. And so we went home, and I think my father sensed that, because that next morning he said, now, you go, after school, you go see that old man, or don't you come home. And
he was really pushing you in that direction.
Yeah.
He was making that decision for you.
Yes, he was. And so no one thought of not going home, you know, at that time, unless you were beaten or starving or something, and couldn't say I was. So I went to see him. The old man sat down and explained the scale to me. And I caught on right away, but he, like many old people, he kept talking and going over the same grounds. And I thought, well, it must not be as simple as it seems. So, but after he got through talking about it, I found out I had understood it, and that gave me a little more confidence. And so he put me into the office then. And he
put you to work?
Well, he wanted me to stay out there. He set me up a table by his desk, so he'd have company too. And he was kind of the watchdog. He'd already retired, you see. He's 80-some then. And he wanted me to sit out there, and he could talk to me about it. And he wanted me to trace the Greek orders on linen, I think. And so he told me, he didn't tell me anything about the Greeks, but he told me that I was supposed to copy all of those because they were the basis of architecture. But I couldn't get very excited about it, because up to then I'd made up my own stuff when I drew buildings or anything else, and tracing something like that didn't seem right to me.
About what year was that?
1916.
So it was really, the Beaux-Arts training was all over.
All over, yes. And I didn't know anything about that either, but I was completely green. He says, you can't go back to that door that goes into drafting room. You can't go back there till I tell you you can. And you sit here and do the drawings here and run errands for us, and we won't pay you anything till you can earn it. And but we'll teach you something. So,
how long did that go on?
Well, that went on quite a little while, and one day I was tracing these things, and I hated them. He never told me why they were basic, or why I should do that, or what the Greeks were like, or anything like that at all. It was just traces. And so one day the engineer of the firm came through. He was a younger man, and he says, what's wrong with you? The old man was out then. He could read me like a book, and he says, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't like this stuff. He says, well, what you doing it for? First question then. And I said, well, the old man told me to. And he says, well, you'll never get any place doing what people tell you to. He says, why do you care what the Greeks did 3,000 years ago? Why don't you come back here and find out what's going on now? And that sounded like sense to me. And besides, I was awfully anxious to see what went on back there, because I'd see clients go back and material salesmen and all kinds of people. And so he took me back. I said, what about the old man? He said, oh, the hell with the old man, I'll fix it with him. So I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to, he set me up a table. He says, design a house, just like that. And I'd never seen a house I thought anyone had ever designed. I hadn't seen any house that I'd even thought of in connection with any kind of architecture or anything. And so I said, where would it be? Well, it doesn't matter, just design a house, and walked out. And I thought, well, what in the world can I do? It was a pretty loose program, you know, and there, no budget, no client, no lot or anything.
You were too young to appreciate it.
And there were about a dozen draftsmen in the place working away on plans and all, and they ignored me. I was just a little kid then to them, you know. So I thought, well, all I can do is just draw a house I think I like. And so I drew one, and I'd never heard of anybody at that time. I mean anybody as an architect, or I'd never known of any house ever got designed, you see. But I started to work on one, and I liked flat roofs then, I remember, and a wide eave. And windows kind of grouped together in bands with casements that opened out. They somehow appealed to me, although I hadn't seen much that way, but I had seen individual casement windows that opened out. But the idea of stressing this horizontal kind of feeling must have come more from the prairie environment I was in than anything else, because I really didn't know anything else.
That was Oklahoma.
Yes. And so finally, after a while, the draftsman got curious what this little brat was doing in there. So one of them came over and looked at it and said, hey guys, come here and look here. We got a Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. here. And I thought, what in the world's that? I never heard of a Frank Lloyd Wright or any other kind of thing. And so one of them says, oh, don't give us that. That's where you got it. I said, got what? He says, well, your design there. You copied one of his, didn't you? And I said, no, I didn't copy anything. Oh, don't give us that. That's copied straight from Frank Lloyd Wright. I said, well, who's that? He said, oh, he's an architect in Chicago. At that time, it was about 1916 there. And I said, well, I never heard of him, and they wouldn't believe it. So I said, who is he? And they said, oh, he's a weirdo. And I said, what do you mean? No, he's crazy. He wears funny-looking clothes, corduroy suits, and he wears his hair clear down to his neck, to his shoulders, and he's really strange. And nothing good about him, and then they ended it up, and he's a wow with the women. And they'd been reading the scandal sheets.
That was going on.
Hers.
Those were the years.
Yeah, of course, I didn't know it. I just looked at the funny page. I never looked at the news. And
those are the years when he was in the paper.
very much, and very much to his detriment. But that's what I got out of them, and they thought he was crazy and all. So I thought, well, if this looks like him and he's crazy, what's that make me? So then I thought, well, I better design another house. So this time I did one with a low gable, but low pitch, but wide eaves again, and banked windows and all. One of these fellows came back, looked again, and said, boy, you can't get away from that Wright stuff, can you? And I was getting sick and tired of hearing it, because I didn't even know what they were accusing me of copying. And this made me kind of mad because I didn't like them to think I was copying something for some reason. I don't know why. But I thought it was something I'd made up myself, you see. So I noticed that Mr. Rush, who was the senior partner of the firm that was active and designed and laid out the planning and all that, and he never entered into this conversation at all, never said anything. And he'd always say good morning to me, and that was about all. But I noticed that when he had anything to work on, he'd get out an old battered up magazine that was about to fall to pieces, and he'd peek in it in a very subversive way and look around and see if anyone was watching.
Little source book.
Yeah, and then he'd go over and he'd just draw like mad, all charged up, you know, like it was really something that he was getting out of that, you see. And I watched this from my point of vantage way back in the corner of the room. And so I was very curious, and I never have believed that I had any more ability than anyone else. If I had more of anything, it was curiosity, I think. And so this really puzzled me. And so one day I noticed he went out to lunch and didn't lock this cabinet. So I hung on, and after they were all out, then I went to peek in this thing to see what charged him up so much. It was the March 1908 issue of the Architectural Record, which was 8 years old then. And the whole issue was devoted to Frank Lloyd Wright's work. Mm-hmm. And boy, I just about not hit the ceiling when I saw it. Here was everything I liked already built, you know, things that I thought that I liked, you know, were right there in front of me. And it was by this very questionable person that these guys said was kooky or crazy, this Frank Lloyd Wright, you see. And I was so entranced I forgot to go eat lunch, and Mr. Rush came back and caught me looking at it, and I knew he'd been a little subversive about it, and I thought I better watch out now, he's going to kick me out. And but he didn't. He just smiled and he said, "I thought you'd find that someday." And I think he might have planted it so I would, but I said, "Well, who is this Frank Lloyd Wright anyway?" And he said, "Well, he and his teacher, Louis Sullivan, are the two greatest American architects." First good word I'd heard from him about him. And so that was a little more like it. And I borrowed the magazine.
And it wasn't so bad to be like him with that kind
with
of
that
introduction.
kind of pedigree, no. So I went home and I borrowed the magazine, read the article in the Cause of Architecture, which was a very fine one. Mm-hmm. And that was my Bible then for some time. But I said to Mr. Rush then, why do all of these people call him a weirdo and all these names? And he said, very simple, they're stupid. And so then of course, I couldn't eat or sleep or think anything but Frank Lloyd Wright for a while. And then...
Did you ever study with him?
No, never. But I did write him a letter then. And I addressed it Frank Lloyd Wright, Taliesin, Wisconsin. I didn't know that wasn't the name of a town. But we had good postal service then, and he got it.
There.
And he wrote me back a very nice letter. What I'd asked him was, I said I'd seen the work of his published in the 1908 issue of the Record, and I'd like to know if any other publication had happened that would give me some idea what he'd done in the last 8 years to bring me up to date on it. And
I must have liked that question.
And I explained,
very intelligent question from a young admirer.
And I explained to him my age and that I was just getting started in architecture and all. And I'd read his article and felt I'd learned a lot from it and so on. It was a fan letter. And he wrote me a very nice letter back and said that he was glad he had a young admirer in Oklahoma. that probably seemed to him like the jumping off place then, because he'd never been there at that time. And he said that he was taking the liberty of sending me gratis 2 portfolios of his work published in Germany in 1910,
portfolio.
which would bring me 2 years nearer to date.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And he did send me those. And
Lovely.
boy, I was sailing on cloud 9 then, and all of this built up my stock with Mr. Rush, you see. That Mr. Wright, who was one of his favorites, took the trouble to write to me, and so he started paying attention to me then. And he started teaching me things about planning and circulation, detailing, and all sorts of things, you see, like that.
So that was really your educational background,
Yes,
working
I
in
never
that.
went to school.
So that was really it.
And Mr. Endicott was taking me in hand with structure, see. So my first house was built when I was 14.
That's incredible.
And the
With the firm or on a private?
It was for some people who wanted the firm to do it, but they didn't like to do houses, and they were busy with commercial work. And so they asked me to do this, and I did, and it was seen through all the way. But
that's an incredible story.
But the firm always gave me credit for my work, which was extremely unusual, because very few architectural firms ever let you know who designed or planned the buildings, you know, if they didn't. So that's how I got into it, and that's why I eventually, after, well, I've stayed with them 15 years, and the last part of it was after I'd taken my license exam. I was part of the firm, you see, and we were very, very busy, and I designed the Boston Avenue Church in Tulsa, which was about $1 million building at that time, when I was 22, you see. But I'd been in the office 10 years, and I had done a building 14 stories high before that, and some others. And
you really grew up within
I just grew up in it. And I had, it was offered to me by some very wealthy people who had no children to send me to MIT and then to Paris to be polished off at the Beaux-Arts, which was considered the education. But I didn't want to do that. I'd had a taste of blood by then, and I didn't want to go that route. And
probably better that you didn't.
And the firm advised me not to, also. But my parents thought I was a fool to not take it up, you see. But I figured I had to have some authority from somebody that they would listen to, and they didn't know anything about Sullivan or Wright, but they knew I was always raving about them, so, and that they were published and known. So what I did was to write to both of them and ask their advice. And I got a letter back from Sullivan, and says, "My dear young friend, I have your letter a certain date here, and about your education." He says, "I want you to know that I've had precisely that same education in those same schools." And he said, "I've spent my entire lifetime trying to live it down." And I don't see what anyone would want out of it. And signed these name big letters across the bottom. Well, that was great. Then Mr. Wright wrote back a very terse comment, said, "Dear Bruce, if you want to lose Bruce Goff, go to school." And that was all. So, fortified with those things, I was able to convince my parents I should stay where I was. And it was better I did, because the schools at that time were still buried in the past, you know. And they felt you had to be Greek or Roman or Gothic or Renaissance, and they took sides on those like they would now. Who do you like in architecture or something? But this was good for me, that that I did make that decision.
How did you start out on your own?
Well,
doing your own work outside of that firm?
Oh, you see, the work had been published already under giving me credit for work ever since I was 14. And so I was known a little bit, you know, then. Mm-hmm. And then the Depression, you've probably heard of, that hit the country. Yes, we had more work than I could have done in 10 years, probably lined up actual contracts for hospitals and schools and all kinds of large work, you know, a big athletic club and a lot of things like that, which I designed. But when the bottom dropped out of the bank, that was all over the country, and so there was nothing to do, and all projects were out. So even though you had contracts, and if you had any money in the bank, it was gone. And so I decided then to go to Chicago and get another scene. And I'd learned about people there, so particularly interested in Alfonso Iannelli, and he had done the sculpture on the Midway Gardens and worked with Elmsley and them, and Chicago people generally, and with Barry Byrne. Did a great deal of work with Barry Byrne, who was a Wright apprentice there too. And I met them, and of course I got to go up and meet the big boy up in Taliesin. He's my...
1 minute.
Okay.
I guess if I have one more question to ask you, I would ask you, what is your favorite project that you designed? What do you look back on that gives you the most pleasure?
Well, I've gotten pleasure out of all of them. I don't know quite how to evaluate which gave me the most, but I'm always tempted to quote Wright on this question. When they ask him his favorite building, he always said the next one.
You are still busy now, aren't you? You're working on current projects?
Yes, a number of them. And very interesting ones, and they get more interesting all the time as projects to do, I mean. So in Australia recently, one of the architectural students heard one of my lectures, and he said, "Mr. Goff, you're not anything like I thought you'd be." I said, "What?" He says, "You're so old, and your work looks so young." I said, "Are you still practicing?" I said, "Not anymore. I know what I'm doing now." I don't, but I let him think that.
Well, that's a good note to end our conversation on. I thank you very much, Mr. Goff.
You're welcome. It's been nice.
Okay. That was wonderful. I love that story. I know that people always mistakenly think that you with this, and then I'm going to put it on you, okay? You want to take a little seat? Good evening. It's wonderful to see all of you out here to see a true original. You're all in for a very special treat. Bruce Goff is an architect who was born in 1904. He came to architecture because his father decided that that might be a nice thing for him to become, and apprenticed him to an architect's office. And luckily, it worked very well. He's done he's produced a tremendous body of varied, vital, and interesting work, and he has a lot of lovely slides that he's going to be sharing with us tonight. And we're just very pleased to have you with us tonight, Mr. Goff. Probably wasn't the most elegant introduction,
That was all right.
but it was sincere.
I know. Thank you. Good evening. We weren't trying to be stylish by being late, but the restaurant was a little bit late. But anyways, Mr. Wright once said, now that we're all here, after he came in about an hour late, we'll get this thing started, he said. He said, I always have to start everything. And he started. But actually, I'm not here to talk about anything right now, but just to show you some of the work. And this work has been going on for some time. And my first house was built when I was I think I was 14 years old at that time. And I've been at it ever since. The first one was not meant to be, I wasn't thinking of it being anything particularly unusual or trying to make it so, but I went out to the job, it was about finished, and a carload of people came by and they started looking at it and laughing and making fun of it. And they said, look at this crazy house. And I thought, well, what's so darn funny? You know, I got out and looked at it. I couldn't see anything crazy about it. And the clients seemed to like it, but I was pretty upset by this. So I thought, well, there must be something funny about it to make them react to it that way. So I took a good, serious look at it, but I still couldn't see anything funny about it. But it disturbed me a great deal. And I went back to the office, and one of the principals, the structural man of the firm, Endicott, said, what's wrong with you? And I told him about this incident. He says, well, don't let that worry you. He says, just remember, as long as you're in the trenches, this was wartime talk, and says, as long as you're in the trenches doing what everyone else is doing, they're not going to know you're there. But the minute you get out into no man's land, they're going to start shooting at you from both sides. And he said, you better get yourself a good tough hide, because you're going to need it the way you're headed. And so I had to get a good tough hide. But this has happened so that without trying to be controversial, that used to be the polite name they'd use about me, that I was controversial. I've never tried to be controversial. But like one time, when Mr. Wright came to OU to talk to us, the newspapers of the town said that he was the most controversial architect in the country. And I told him he's going to have to give us a good talk because that's what they said about him. And he says, I'm not controversial, Bruce. He says, I don't start this stuff. It's the other people that are digging it up and making it controversial. I don't. And so really I'm not, I don't intend to be controversial. But if it is, why, usually people get over it eventually when I do something worse. It seems that then they'll say, well, why don't you do something more like you did back in that other job, you know? And then I got to realizing this wasn't an unusual condition either, because many people like Stravinsky and other people I admired in other fields had that same thing happen, where they heard a piece like The Firebird, for instance, and they thought it sounded wild, and still they couldn't help but like some people liked it, and got him noticed and all. And then when he came out with Petrushka, everybody said, oh my gosh, why didn't you do something nice like The Firebird? And then they were just barely getting used to that, and then he came out with The Rite of Spring, and that really blew their sockets. And they just thought the world had come to an end with that one. Biggest shock, I guess, ever given at an art performance of any kind, ever. But, you know, it's funny. The work you do is branded as being out of the mainstream, usually. And this has been a criticism that's thrown at many, many people who've been before us and are still with us. And it's a tricky thing, this mainstream, because it seems that no matter what's out of the mainstream, that crazy stream has a way of getting around and including it. And so in the history books then, what was out of the mainstream is suddenly part of the mainstream, you see. So you can't win for losing. And the thing is that they say that today's radical is tomorrow's conservative. And this is true in many senses of the word. The things that we think are so radical become less so as we become more familiar with them. But the point is, I don't try to cause these controversies or these remarks, but I just try to do what I think I should do. I soon learned I shouldn't imitate people. I should try to do my own thing as I could understand it. And eventually I realized that the work had to start with the client. It was the center of energy that would produce this. I have to be a medium that can interpret this, and that means that I have to know a great deal about design, about art, about all kinds of things, and means I had to study a whole lot. That's why I didn't go to school. And present company accepted now. But the thing is that no matter how much you study and all of that, then I think you should forget all that when you go to do something. Because whatever you've learned from studying should become assimilated and a part of you if you think it's worth it. And if it means something to you, it can be very helpful, naturally. But people say they get the impression that the work you do is just for your own vanity or gratification. But that they call such a person a prima donna architect and all these names, but antisocial and everything else. But I think that you don't count really as an individual unless you do what you can do as an individual. And I think that you need to do that. You need to respect others as individuals too. We're too apt to lump other people as those people out there, you see, but they're not just masses of faces of no character, no purpose or anything. They're real people too, and they're people who feel, and they're people who have things that they want out of life, just like all of us do. And then I think my job as an architect is to try to solve these so that the solution is their house, not mine. And I've never built a house yet that I would want. I don't know what in the world it would be like. It would probably be like nothing ever seen on land or sea. But it would be the most difficult job I could ever tackle, I can assure you. But there is a strange thing about any work of art that we are inclined to want to inhabit it, to make it ours. And you'll hear many people say, well, that may be all right, but I couldn't live with it, or it's not my dish, or something like that. And either that, or else they want to know more about it, and they want to enter into it. Usually, if it's something we like, we do feel, whether it's a novel or whether it's a piece of music or a painting or what, that we want to enter into it ourselves and become a part of it. And I think this is interesting as architects because the others we can only imagine we're doing this, you see. And we have to do it to get anything out of it. You have to really get into a piece of music to understand it, or into a painting or anything else. But in architecture, it's the only art that you can actually physically do this with, you can actually exist in it, live in it, or work in it, or whatever, as actually entering into it. And so I try to bear that in mind. And if you do a job well, or it's appropriate for the client, I mean, that you will give them something that they enjoy inhabiting. And now this, you have to give them more than they think they want, though, because they'll be educated, you might say in a sense, to how you interpret their wants and needs and so on. But if you stop right there, you wouldn't be giving them any room to grow on, you see. And so you need to give them something more that they can keep interested in as they grow and as their taste improves or changes or such. And so I believe that we do have to not only give them what they think they want at the time, need at the time, but we have to anticipate what might happen that would help them to grow even more. I think any work of art has several qualities. It needs the quality of surprise, for one thing. Surprise will engage people's attention, and it can be mild or wild. You can be mildly surprised or scared to death, But you do need to have that quality in a work of art. But then, not just that, though. You need something that will sustain your interest and allow you to know it, or make you curious, want to know it better. And even that isn't enough. You need to have the quality of mystery to sustain your interest. There's no formula for mystery, of course. But usually, if it's beautiful, it'll have mystery, or if it's more than just beautiful, it may have a great deal. We see that in nature, everything I've been saying, all around us all the time. So this is how I feel my work relates with nature, or how I try to relate it with nature. And then I know that the only way I know that I ever can achieve mystery in a work of art is if the client tells me I feel I like my house better all the time, but I still don't quite understand it, or I still keep discovering things in it. I remember one time I visited one of Wright's clients in Topeka, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, who had a house of Wright's. He lived in it about 20 years. I asked the usual question, how does it feel to live in this house? This old boy says, well, I'll tell you how it feels. I had a terrible time learning to live in this house. And I said, why? He says, well, it wasn't my idea to get right in the first place. My wife read some fool article he wrote about the relation of the house and the garden or something. And here we built this big garden out here. I didn't need a big garden, but he said she was talked into that by him, and said we had all kinds of trouble with it. Every time it rained, it leaked, the same old story there. And he was enumerating all of the difficulties he'd had, and then he said, but every year we go abroad and stay a while, and then when we come back, the house seems to always look different to me. And he says, you know, I'm still just beginning to find out things about this house that I don't know whether he meant or not. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, see that, look here now, see that leaded glass window up there? Yeah, up in the clear story of the living room. He said, now the sun's shining through it, and look at that pattern it's making on the floor. And he says, you suppose that old rascal knew it was going to do that? And I said, well, I don't know that he knew it had hit that exact spot and all that, but I'm pretty sure he anticipated it. Well, this is, I'm going to show you quite a few slides because I can't show you anything typical. And then the other thing is that what I can show you, you can't show with one picture. A lot of buildings you can take one picture and that's enough. But I think that it'll show it, you know. Gaudi's work is the opposite extreme. You can take 1,000 pictures and hardly move an inch and you'll get a different picture every time, because the work is so rich in invention, and you move over a little bit, you have a totally different thing happening. It's very interesting that way. It's difficult to photograph that because of that too. But anyway, we'll tackle this, and we'll move them pretty fast because I'd rather you'd see a number. Another reason there's so many is that as you grow older, you get more work done. And then it makes it harder to decide which ones you want to show. But we'll go ahead now and show you this. This is an early building I did after some of the other early ones. It's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's the Page Warehouse, as you can see from the sign. I'd convinced the owner he didn't need a sign. While I was away to war up in the Aleutians as a CB, some sign man convinced him he did, and he says, I know that guy's stuff, I can make it harmonize. And so he copied something off of the church tower in Tulsa, had nothing to do with this building that I'd done, and tried to use that theme in that sign, which he didn't do very well. But anyway, we don't have to worry about it anymore because the building was imploded recently to make room for a temporary road to an interchange. This was an attempt to, well, for one thing, the budget was so tight that it was didn't cost any more than the average warehouse done by the tracks, you know, a cubic foot. But we showed the structure through the skin, and frankly hung the brickwork, the skin, right on it. I'll show you some other work. This was done when I was 22, and I'd been in the office 10 years, and it's the Boston Avenue Church in Tulsa. It was a difficult job to have all this responsibility and at that age, and very difficult to deal with a 44-person building committee. And their main aim was to have something taller than the Catholics. But the Catholics were smart because they'd built theirs on higher ground, you see. And so we had to go up higher. I figured if we did have to go up there, why, we'd make use of it with offices and various things that they could use instead of just having a big dunce cap up there pointing up. The preacher's main concern was he didn't want a church that you had to have a cross on it to tell it was a church. And so we've carefully avoided a cross. And I put these fins up here, they're about 35 feet high, of glass to reflect the sun and the moon and catch the light. It has the circular auditorium on the right, and the educational plant was quite large for those days on the left. The sculptor was Robert Garrison. I did all of the work around the figures, and he did the figures. And we used terracotta and stone, and cut stone, and copper, and glass. Auditorium windows are back of the congregation, so they don't have to face the light, and they're W-shaped, so they won't have back talk acoustically. And the light inside is balanced then with a skylight over the center of the auditorium. Right over at the extreme right, the low part is a fairly recent addition to the building that was supposed to match up with the building. I didn't do it, of course. But, and they also added these air conditioning units up on top, you see. Strictly functional, right up to date. And they were supposed to sit back of this wall, but they didn't want to bother to run the lines that far, you see. These horses are significant because they represent the circuit riders who, the people on them, I should say, that bishops that rode down through the hinterland and the wilds of Oklahoma and Texas and so on, preaching the gospel from horseback. That's why they had to be there. One thing that was soundly criticized was that we had this carport for the car people to let their passengers out and go park, you see. And that was supposed to be very sacrilegious by some, because you're supposed to suffer. Here you see the glass reflecting the light. These are recent pictures, so the building's holding up fairly well. Doesn't even leak. Mr. Wright once said all good architecture leaks, so this must not be a good one. Inside, the social lobby connects the north entrance with the south, and this is about half the length of it. It's where the people can mill around and talk with each other before and after services. And then the educational plant's on the left, and the auditorium is on the right. That's one of the lot of glass windows in the chapel I designed. I had to lay these all out full size, give the information about the color and all that. And these are the windows in the auditorium, and they go up past the balcony. All these bevels are in the pattern of the glass. Most of the church windows of this time had figures in them, and so this was a little bit different. The top of the windows climax up this way above the balcony. Oops. This is in the auditorium. You notice the cross finally got in there. That was years later. The choir comes down and files out into these stalls, and they're placed at an angle to each other so the voices meet at the center and converge at there, and then they're distributed in a radial way from there into the auditorium. So if you're seating over at the end, you don't just hear all bass, or the other end all tenor. You see, it mixes the voices when you hear them. There's the skylight and the general lighting, which is indirect. And that's the skylight. They used to call indirect lighting at this time, it hadn't been out very long, call it incorrect lighting, because you couldn't see the light bulbs. Well, we did a number of buildings in Tulsa, and would have been building them there yet probably, but the Depression that maybe you've read about, I don't think many of you were then around, but it hit the country and the banks folded, and we had more work than we could have done in 10 years. Big work lined up, athletic club, hospitals, and schools, and churches, and all kinds of things. But this was a new community. Tulsa was growing with the oil business. It was called the oil capital of the world then. And these people were the great unwashed, as they say. they were not cultural, you know, with the proper pronunciation and such, but they were people who were not afraid to do things, and they knew it didn't have to be like it was in New York or some other seaport. This is a little vacation house I did after I went to Chicago when I left Tulsa at that time. And it's in Louisville, Kentucky. It's on the top of a hill. Had two principal views and then an entrance approach, so it suggested a triangle, and particularly in the way it was located in some trees. So I just started with that and used a triangular module. The roof is, the eaves are perforated to cut down on the updraft around the hill. And you'll notice that there's a glass between the walls and between the roof all around, so the roof has the effect of floating. Now, I think that's the first time that was done. The material is redwood and copper Lloyd. That was a building paper covered with a skin of copper, and then with these redwood cleats to hold it. As I said, the triangular module was carried throughout, even into the dog. These struts come out, don't hold the roof, they just keep it from twisting. It's all cantilevered from inside. Then the war came along, and I had to get into it. I was just under the age I could have kept from it. And I joined the Seabees, construction battalion of the Navy. And I got to build a lot of things. Everybody said, well, you might as well forget thinking you're an architect now. You'll never get anything, never get the service to go along with you on anything. But up in the Aleutians, I did quite a few buildings and different things. And then returning from there to California at Camp Parks, I did a number of buildings there. This was a chapel made of Quonset huts. The CB labor was used. When the camp was disbanded, this was purchased by a church in San Lorenzo, California, and re-erected there with some deletions, but it's there now. And it had to be for the Protestants and the Catholics and the Jews. And this shows it set up for the Catholic or for the Protestants. And when the Catholics used it, they turned the cross around, and it was a crucifix. And then when the Jews used it, it was taken down, and the ark was hung up there. So it had to do triple duty. Up above there is the library, back of this heating and air conditioning shaft that separates them. There's blue plate glass separates those light sources from the center both day and night. Walls are lined with material made of cement, with wood shavings dunked in cement that was called sonotherm. And it's also an insulation. The floor dropped according to the natural grade, so that gave us our pitch in the floor. This was done about that time for an FHA appraiser. And this is the model without the roof. And he had a strange requirement. He said his job was mainly going out and stepping off the size of rooms to determine the footage and the value of the house and so on that was already built. And he said, I want a house that I don't feel I can step off the rooms in. In other words, the measurements of the rooms. And so another thing was, he said he liked water plants. And he said, I wouldn't mind living in a lily pond, but I guess you couldn't do that. I said, why couldn't you? And he says, well, he'd never seen it done. I said, well, if you want to, I'll fix it so you can. So we have the water, and the different living areas are islands out standing in the water, you see. And there's the entrance, and the main island has the dining and kitchen, the dining and music and living area. Then over at this side is the kitchen. On the other side of that is the breakfast area, guest rooms over here. On the other side's the dressing rooms and baths and 2 bedrooms over there. These serpentine walls would screen out the neighbors on both sides. There's a stream at the back of the property that this opens onto with glass. Here's the model with the roof, overhead beam, and the roof is suspended from it, which allows our glass to be suspended glazing without the Mayans or Muttons or anything of that sort. And you can lower the water level just below the bottom of the glass so that the breeze blowing across the water cools the interior. It was poor man's air conditioning, and it really works. This is the side towards the stream at the back. And see this curved wall of glass allows the water to run under, inside and out, and the plants are on both sides to just literally seem to take inside out and in, outside in. This is a different kind of church, very poor church, out in the oil fields. It's a Baptist church. The main thing was here they had a bunch of drill stem pipe, second-hand drill stem pipe they could get for nothing. They had a lot of welders in the congregation. They were great, big, strong oil field workers. And the preacher was a little tiny fellow, Pastor Hoskins, and he said he felt a little embarrassed to ask me to do this church, and I said, why? And he says, well, I've seen your Boston Avenue church, and I like it, but he says, of course, we couldn't begin to do anything like that, but he says, I feel like I'd be asking Michelangelo to do a hot dog stand. And I said, well, I don't think it's the same thing in any way. We'll do your own kind of church. He says, well, be sure and put a big Baptist tank in. He says, I have to dunk those fellows. He says, boy, they sure thrash around when they get in there. So the baptistry is over back of the platform there on the right. And then we use Sunday school rooms below. So they built this themselves. The air's taken in around the base of this cone and exhausted at the top with a device that they made up of glass, which lifts and pneumatically so that the air is breathed through and exhausts out, you see. this way. It's some more poor man's air conditioning. This was a recent picture taken of it, and unfortunately, they didn't do near as good a paint job as our people did at first. They got it all over the roof, as you can see. But there are 12 of these trusses that show outside. They're about 60 feet long, and they're aluminum. When this was being built, a lot of people stopped and asked these workmen what they were building, and they said, "It's a church." And they said, "I never saw a funny-looking church like this. It's a screwy-looking church like this." And this big oil field worker stood up full 6'4" or 6" and said, "Brother, it's not screwy, it's unusual." And nobody would argue with them. They had a little box over at the side. The collection box is right over there. Usually they put some in it. The preacher called each of these pipe trusses. It happened there were 12 of them, without any intention to be symbolic on my part, but he called each one after one of the apostles. And he put teams to work on making each one, and their wives cooked them chicken dinners, and they built this in their spare time. They averaged 60 chickens a meal, for those who want statistics. Inside, they couldn't afford a light fixture, and we needed something that had some size to it in this volume. And so we used the electric conduit pipe with cake pans for reflectors, aluminum, and silver bottom bulbs, and all those shadowy little circle things you see are iced tea coasters that I got them to sew together. And I was not trying to be ad hoc, as Mr. Jenks says, but it was just trying to make do with very little, because lots of times the budget doesn't allow. Like here, it didn't allow much. That's looking up at the light source, the main windows up above. This is a house in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, near Tulsa, that was done for a ceramic manufacturer. You drive up back of it. The swimming pool's up in the treetops there. Opens off of the screen porch that you see back of it. As you drive around this circular courtyard in the back of it, you enter over to the right there. All this grill work you see is made of tile I designed, and they made in their plant. And it's cemented to both sides of plate glass as a core. And so that is inside and out, and the holes that are in this design show through the glass, so you can see, lets light in. That clear story balances the light inside from the other side of the room and the upper part of the room on this side. We took the local brick, which was just an ordinary common brick, and glazed it with the green and the gold. Those planters you see are boiler ends that they had a boiler plant in town that made these. They're about 8 feet in diameter, and they're held up on skylights that light the bathrooms. At night, when the lights are on, they reflect light out into the courtyard. Here you go down a few steps because the grade is sloping down, and you come in to the house that way, across a small bridge. There's the pattern of the perforated tile. Inside you can see the doors made the same way. That's where the door closer shows up at the ceiling. Just glass with the tile cemented to it. You come on in and step down into the living room. All of the radial walls that separate the spaces are sliding, so you can open it up various ways. Clear story is up above us on the left, fireplace over there. We also have tile on this cone. How you like that? That's a house in Chicago, or was. It should have been torn down, and it was about to fall down, and the porch was all rotten on it, and the windows would crumble if you tried to raise them. But the house generally was sound, but he couldn't afford to tear it down and build a new house because of the cost of construction being so much more, even then. And he wanted this location because the children could walk about 3 blocks and get to school, which was a big help in Chicago there. And so I had to take this building and work with it. So this is before and this is after. The old house is still in there, believe it or not. But needless to say, this caused a great many near catastrophes with traffic. The people go there for miles seeing things like what you see on either side there, and what this was too once. And so all of a sudden this thing flashes in front of them and they can't believe it, and they jam the brakes on somebody, runs into the back of them. He kept a first aid kit there for a while. But you see, we put the entrance over to the left in the garage, and then his business was making air checks off of the air for recordings, and that was in a space in where the brick is there. We just put aluminum over the roof as it was and left the eaves as they were, and then sloped it back to the wall, as you see there. This house is in Norman, Oklahoma. It was built in '47, and it was written up by Life magazine as Martian. They opened it up for public inspection, I think for charity purposes. And there were blocks of people, about 4 blocks long and 3 abreast, waiting to get in all the time. They'd take 20 of them at a time. And the house had to have more people go through it than there were people in the town. But it was causing quite a stir. And I remember one old lady in the crowd that came over and asked me if I was the architect. She looked like Whistler's mother, and I said, yes, I'm the architect. She says, well, young man, I want to congratulate you. This is the biggest thrill I've had since my first ride on an elevator. I don't know whether that was the compliment or not, but the stone is laid in a different way from usual to bring out the nature of the horizontal bedding of the sandstone. We couldn't get any regular stonemasons to do it around town, so I got two young gents out in the filling station outside of town there to do it. They did a very good job because they didn't know any better. Oh, by the way, while I'm on this subject of ad hoc, these vents that open all have ashtrays in them for that diamond-shaped square pattern. I went in to buy them into Woolworths. They were a dime a piece. And I went in there to buy them. So how many do you want? I told him 320. And he says, "What you doing, starting a nightclub?" I said, "No, we're going to put them in the windows." He thought I was just joking. But Mr. Wright didn't approve of this way of using stone. He thought the wall should end with a very positive statement out at the end, and I conceived of it more as sort of dry brushing it out into the yard, you know, but he thought it should have a very definite, you know, strong statement at the end. Inside the living room, this furniture wasn't mine. It was put in during the opening of the house. In the garden room that you enter, this is a ramp that goes up to the bedroom level. And you can go up there without getting wet, believe it or not, but this water was because they turned the waterfall onto, whoever took this picture turned the waterfall onto strong, got that wet, you see. But you don't really need a raincoat. But this ramp was made up of boards laid over two curved steel members that had 2-inch flanges. And I went over there before they put those boards on, and I was checking some things out, and two ladies came in. One of them, well, they both had these spike heel shoes, and one of them started to walk up this flange, 2 inches wide, you see. And she said, "Well, I heard they had ramps in this house, but my, aren't they narrow?" You'd be surprised what you hear. This is a house I did for Rear Admiral Wilson. He was the one in charge of the CB base at Camp Parks, where I did that chapel and other work. And after he got through service, then I did this house for him. It's in this case, I used the module. The room size was the module, both in plan and section, so that they only had themselves, no children or anyone else to worry about, but they did have pretty good-sized Navy parties here. And so none of the walls separating the spaces go to the ceiling. They're all up just above door height, just for visual privacy. And then they're on the short 45-degree cuts. Those are jalousie windows from floor to ceiling. And that same form in section is carried in the third dimension across the top for skylights, you see, and all around the perimeter. These square panels in between these pipe frames are wood, and also for the ceiling. They're standard and shop fabricated. And I had intended to be indigenous and use cypress, which is native wood to the place. But they'd sent it all to California. And so I had to use redwood, which came from California, of course. So sometimes it's kind of hard to be indigenous. But it was a nice wood. And this is, the skylights are above, you see, and the plastic's used for the crawlspace too. Floors are cork, and the heat's glass electric heat, radiating glass. The doghouse there was not my idea. Not my idea. We had some plastic left over and some scraps, and we didn't have sense enough to get rid of them in a hurry. And the Admiral had an idea. But this frame that you see that has no panels with it is the structural frame that's used throughout. And it also holds a large wisteria vine and a rain cover over the car. This was an early use of the system. There was a rage in schools many years after this of what they call systems. Everyone caught on to that term, and everybody was concerned with systems. This house was an early effort at systems long before that, but it was done about 45, somewhere along in there. Inside you see how the skylights carry through both ways. The kitchen's back of this screen. The glass heat panels are there in the lighter areas. View out over the bay, Perdido Bay, just off the Gulf Coast, Gulf of Mexico. This is the Ford House in Aurora, Illinois. It was done about 1949. And for a lady who owned the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts, where I'd taught some when I first went to Chicago, that's how I happened to meet her. She was a very large, monumental kind of woman. It looked like Gaston Lachaise had designed her. But she was a very good watercolor painter, and she could say all those four-letter words like they should be said. But very direct and very positive, no doubt where she stood on anything. But here she wanted a big open area in the center where she could show her paintings and where she could have her kitchen. She didn't want to be in the back of the house somewhere with a kitchen. She entertained quite a little, and she said she wanted to be out where the guests were. And then there was a bar there and a place to eat. And then over to the right was her mother's bedroom, which was a fourth of a dome, and her bedroom on this side. And then the screen porch goes around and completes the dome on the outside, only it isn't covered, it's screened in out there. It's a steel Quonset rib dome that's revolved to make a dome instead of using it in a cylindrical form like it usually is, like in the chapel, say. You spin it around and make a dome, see, the arch. And so it was an easy way to do that. That's a section. The skylight's up over the center. Her studio was up part way on that upper level. You see the other levels down a little ways. And there's a glass wall that separates the living room from the porch, screen porch. This wall is coal, masonry, black coal, and chunks of glass in it occasionally. And the ceiling is herringbone cypress. When this building was completed, there were so many people coming by laughing at it and making fun of it. And she put a sign out in front that said, "We don't like your house either." This brown color you see around the roof edge is, and also makes the ceiling and some of the flat ceilings, is salvage rope dipped in creosote and nailed to the wood. And that enabled us to make these compound curves, you see. You'll notice over there there's some merry-go-round horses in the porch. I asked her why in the world she put those there later when I saw them. She says, "Well, everyone thinks the damn thing revolves." She said, "I thought I'd give my grandchildren a honk." About this time, Mises' Farnsworth house was going up, and Mrs. Farnsworth and Mrs. Ford were good friends. One day, Mrs. Farnsworth asked Mrs. Ford if she had closets in her house, and she said, "Well, of course, why?" She says, "Well, how did you ever talk your architect into doing that?" And so she said, "Well, I didn't have to talk him into it, he just did it." She says, "Well, I've been trying to get Mies to let me have closets, but he says no." And when I say, "Well, what do I do with my clothes?" And he says, "Hang them over a chair." And well, they did end up finally with some. His by the way, his troops used to come by this house and ridicule it and give the builder a bad time over it. What are you building that crazy thing for? And all that. They thought they'd bring the maestro out one time for kicks too, you know. They knocked on the door and they said, "Are you Mr. Ford?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Well, Mies van der Rohe's in the car out here and he wants to see your house." He says, "Who?" He said, "Mies van der Rohe." Wright says, "Who?" Ford says, "Who's he?" And they looked at him like somebody asked a Christian, who's Jesus or something. And so they thought it was just terrible that no one had heard, that he hadn't even heard of him. And Sam Ford says, well, I never heard of him. He said, well, you should feel honored that he wants to come and see your house. So Ford says, okay, well, I'll bring him in, you know. He didn't know who he was. It could have been Joe Smith or anybody. So when Meese came in, they thought he was just going to tear it to pieces. The troops did. So when he walked over to Mr. Ford, he says, are you conscious of the space within the interior? And so so Sam didn't know what he meant. He says, yeah, we got lots of room. This is the painting studio in the Skylight. This Sam Ford was quite a character. Some ladies came in here one day and they said, aren't you afraid you'll get cobwebs up in those ribs up there? And he says, well, we hope we do. And she said, why? And he says, well, we just love cobwebs. We think they're beautiful. Don't you? And they got out of there in a hurry. All kinds of stories. This house is probably one of the cheapest houses I ever did. It's a Babinger house. I say cheapest because Jane did most of the work. And he came in and with his wife, and they wanted a house that they could have as a pretty open type house. They didn't want it all cut up in little boxes, he said. And they liked to do indoor gardening. They could make a plant grow in under this platform, I'm sure, because they knew how to water them and feed them and all that. But they wanted to use the stone on the site, and he wanted something he could build himself, because he was an art professor and didn't have any money, of course. So he was, unlike most painters and artists, he was very rugged. He looked more like a truck driver than he did a wan-looking artist. So he tackled this house and got it built. He'd trade paintings and photograms and things to students who would come out and help him with it, but he did most of it. And he was a great horse trader and managed to get a lot of the materials either for nothing or very little. And so it worked out into a spiral, and the living areas in it are, you might say, furniture and living spaces combined in the same unit. Like these spoon-shaped things you see in the plan have the beds sunk in them, you see, and there are seats built around in them, or different things for different places there. The top one is a studio, as you see, and the section gives you some idea of that. The whole roof is made of Tuba floors, just in Tuba floor depth. Of course, that wouldn't begin to span the wider part of the span, which is about 36 feet. So the roof is actually suspended from this pipe that runs up there in the kitchen in the center of that coil. And it's made of 6-inch drill stem pipe, and he horse traded and got a salvage one of those. Put it up, and that carries the whole, it carries everything in the house except stone. All of the different bowl shapes, the stairs, and the roof. And so it was built with in an area where there's a lot of jack oaks that the farmers of the area call trash because it's awfully hard to clear and get rid of. But you can see it's the stone is from the site, and the windows that are used as such are irregular in shape. It comes crawling up out of the ground from where you approach it. The skylight follows around this curve and lights the plants down below inside. And then the other coil, the other side of the coil, is against the wall and lights that side of the room. So sometime during the day, all the plants get some sunlight. This keeps winding around and up into the studio, which has the large glass window above. When he was building this, there was so much curiosity about it that without any fanfare or advertising or notice at all, out on a country road where very few people ever went by it, it became a rumor that there was something strange going on up there. And so the sightseers would try and find it. And then when they did, they wanted to go through it, see it, and they wanted Gene to tell them what it was and all. And they were kind of nuisances. He thought he'd stop that and charge them $1 a piece, and that would stop them. And it only encouraged him because people had been a little too timid to do that, felt for a buck it'd be worth at least that for laughs, if nothing else. And so he took in, over a period of 5 years, $50,000 from visitors who wanted to see it. And he still takes it in on Mother's Day when he opens it up for that day for the university people to see it. Mrs. Babinger says she cleans the house in 30 minutes with a hose. Waters the plants at the same time. The dining table is 8 feet in diameter, has a mirror top, and revolves so you can set it or clear it without walking around. There are no seats. It's the difference of the floor level that you sit on around that. So the furniture in the house are thought of more and more as something together instead of fixtures put in. These bowl shapes have blisters from bomber blisters, you know, for plastic for lights. We also use those for laboratories. One of the big difficulties in photographing this house is that it never stops anywhere to have its picture taken. And being of the same materials inside and out, it makes it hard to tell many times, if you haven't seen the house, whether you're outside or inside. One day, some big walnut trees in Oklahoma City blew down in a storm. Babinger got an old truck he fixed up for himself, second-hand. He drove up and told them he'd remove the trees if they'd give them to him. So we had solid walnut steps here, you see, and all the countertops and everything were solid walnut. And he sold the rest of the walnut to other people, and that helped to buy something else. You see, he was quite a dealer. Oops. These windows are rather irregular, as you can see. I don't think you'll find that detail in graphic standards. But anyway, this is a place where they eat breakfast. Kitchen's around the bend there. This wall gets higher as the coil gets narrower. Goes up about 3 stories high eventually. Skylight keeps falling on up. Our vines grow up these poles now, up studios up there. This door goes on to the suspension bridge that crosses the stream and helps to counterbalance part of the roof load over on the other side. He learned to weld so he could put in these hangers and different things. And it's very resourceful. Before I go into that, I'll tell you, he finally got so many visitors that they got sick and tired of it. They couldn't sit down to eat or take a bath or anything else without somebody wanting to see the house. So they finally just closed it and wouldn't show it to anyone. One day he said he was out in the yard moving some rocks and his army fatigues, and he was all sweaty and needed to shave and everything. Said this big white and gold Cadillac drove up, and obviously from Texas because it had big steer horns on the front of it. And this man in the front seat was about 6'6" and big white 10-gallon white hat and a very flashy blonde lady sitting beside him. This fellow looks over the edge of his Cadillac. He says he thinks Bavinger's just one of the peons working on the estate or something. He says, can you tell me where I can find Mr. Bavinger? Jean says, I'm Bavinger. What do you want? He says, well, my wife and I drove up from Dallas to see your house. We'd like to see it. So Jane says, well, that's too bad because we're not showing it anymore. Jane said, so this fellow says, well, you can't do that. And he says, can't do what? He says, well, when you have a work of art, you should share it with people. And Jane says, well, I'm an artist, and I appreciate your saying that. I think it's a fine thing to do. He says, but do you really mean what you're saying? This big guy says, well, of course I mean it. What do you mean? He says, is that your wife there? And, so the outcome of that was the big guy says, yeah, I see what you mean, and drove away. And then Jane, telling this story, said, darn it, he almost got in. This is a drawing that was made by his son. At the time, I think he was about 6 or 7 years old. And his teacher in school had passed out some paper and asked each of the students to draw the house they lived in. So Bill Bavinger said, oh, I need 2 pieces to draw my house, 2 pieces of paper. She says, well, why are you so special? And he says, because my house is. She thought he was being a little impertinent. So she says, well, why can't you draw your house on 1 piece of paper like anybody else? And he says, because my house isn't like anybody else. And she thought he was being difficult. So she'd humor him. She left let him have 2 pieces of paper. And so he started right to work like he knew what he was doing, and she gave him a few, 20 minutes or so, and thought then she'd go back and see what he was up to. And she saw not only this drawing, but this one too. And that's why he needed 2 pieces of paper. And so the teacher said, Bill, I don't know what in the world you're drawing. And he says, it's my house, that's what you said to draw. She says, well, that's not a house, that's a bug or something. And, so Bill was very indignant. He says, it is not, it's my house. And so she thought, well, he's a crazy mixed up kid. So she went in and called up his mother, and she says, have you been having problems with Bill? And she says, what do you mean? And she says, she assigned this and passed out the paper and the difficulty of him wanting 2 pieces of paper and all that. And so she said, I don't know what in the world he's drawing. He thinks he's drawing his house. And I wondered if you'd been having problems like this with him. And his mother said, well, have you seen his house? And she said, well, no, I haven't. And she says, well, you better come see his house before you goes crazy. But it's interesting what a child that age would see, how he'd try to express what he saw. You see, he had a pretty good notion at that for what it was. Like in this one, what looks like an explosion of rocks here, he meant to be the curved wall of stone. And see, the skylight was looking down sort of on it with the greenish color. And the pole that suspended the roof was shown up there, and that little gob over at the side was supposed to be the roof over the studio. And then in this other one, if you were drawing something that had so little rectilinearity as this, most people would know, if they wanted to show a cutaway view, they would might think they ought to show it with a loose form or something like that. But or if they were drawing a squarish kind of house, they might use an irregular form to show a cutaway. But he knew that the thing that would look the least like it was part of the house would be a rectangle. And so he drew the rectangle, more or less, to show that was supposed to be a cutaway in there, you see. And that thing that's looked the circle with the X's on it was meant to be the steel framework of one of those bowls when they first hung it up before they pulled it on up, you see. And then the blue underneath that was supposed to be the water in the pool. So he knew quite well what he was trying to draw. And he did turn out to be a licensed architect.